My name is Harold Dunmore, and I'm 71 years old. I've lived long enough to know that the worst kind of betrayal doesn't come with shouting or slamming doors. It comes softly. It comes at midnight, wrapped in whispers between clinking wine glasses, dressed up in smiles that feel real until they don't. It was just past midnight. The fire in Lance and Tessa's living room had burned down to orange embers, casting long shadows across the furniture. The kids, my grandsons Evan and Miles, had been tucked into bed an hour earlier. I sat in the recliner by the hearth, pretending to doze, my eyes half closed but my ears fully awake. Sometimes, when you get to my age, you learn to listen without seeming to. You learn to hear what wasn't meant for you. Tessa's voice drifted from the kitchen, cutting through the quiet like a blade wrapped in velvet. He's getting too comfortable, Lance. We need to make a move soon. I didn't move. Didn't shift. Didn't even breathe different. It's just, it feels wrong doing it now, my son murmured back. Please, she scoffed. He's living in our house. He signed over the papers months ago, didn't he? You said the transfer was done. The world went quiet. Even the embers seemed to stop crackling. Yeah, but, Lance started. Then what's the problem? We'll kick him out after Christmas. He doesn't even deserve to stay till New Year. Then they laughed. Both of them. The kind of laugh that comes easy when you think you've won something. I sat there, hands trembling in my lap, eyes fixed on those dying embers. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a rope around it and was pulling. The home Marjorie and I built, the place where every memory, every photograph, every breath of our marriage lived, had been quietly handed over. By my own son. And I'd signed the papers myself. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. The house felt different after that. Not physically, the pine garland still smelled like Christmas, the golden star still glittered on the tree, the fire still crackled in its place. But something had shifted inside me. Something fundamental had cracked. I'd built my entire life on trust. 60 homes over 30 years in Cedar Falls. Good, sturdy houses where families raised children and built memories. I taught Lance everything I knew. The concrete, the framing, the foundation. How to build something that lasts. How to do it honest. And he'd used my own signature against me. The question that burned in my mind as I sat there, watching those embers glow and fade, wasn't how they'd done it. The question was why I hadn't seen it coming. Why I'd handed over the one thing Marjorie had warned me about. My name on paper, my trust in writing. I'd spent 70 years believing in family. In the idea that blood meant something. That love meant protection. That if you gave enough, sacrificed enough, held firm enough, your children would honor what you'd built. But as I sat alone in that darkened room, listening to my son and his wife laugh about kicking me out, I started to wonder if I'd been wrong about everything. If maybe, just maybe, Marjorie had known something I was too stubborn to understand. The letter she'd left me, the one I found years after she passed, had one line that haunted me. Never sign what you don't read twice. I'd read those papers. I was sure I had. But what if I'd missed something? What if there was more to the story than what Lance had told me? What I didn't know yet was that I was about to discover the answer, and that everything I thought I'd lost was actually still mine to reclaim. If you love raw, real family stories like this, hit subscribe now. You won't want to miss how this ends. The morning light came through the guest room window before I even opened my eyes. Christmas morning. My first one in this house. I lay there for a moment, listening to the sounds of my grandsons running through the hallway, their feet thundering across the floor like a stampede of joy. Evan shouted something about presents. Miles laughed, that pure, uncomplicated laugh that only children have. For a split second, I forgot about the whispers. About the betrayal. about the locked door I now knew was waiting for me on the other side of this holiday. But then it all came rushing back. I got up slowly, moving through the morning routine like a man on autopilot. Shower. Shave. The same blue sweater I'd worn to Christmas dinners for the past 5 years. In the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My face looked hollowed out, like someone had reached in and pulled something essential away. When I came downstairs, Tessa was there at the kitchen island in a cream-colored robe, her hair perfect, her smile bright as a spotlight. She looked like she belonged in a magazine, the kind that shows you lives you can never actually have. "Oh, Dad, good morning," she sang, walking over to pull me into a hug. Her perfume was overwhelming, expensive, suffocating. "Merry Christmas," I said, forcing the words out like I was reading from a script someone else had written. "Merry Christmas to you too. We're so glad you're here. Aren't we, Lance?" Lance came down the stairs carrying Miles on his shoulders. My grandsons. My blood. The only part of this that was real. I smiled at them. Actually smiled. Because they didn't know yet. They didn't know that in a few days, when the calendar flipped, their grandfather would become inconvenient. A problem to solve. "The kids have been up since 5, Tessa laughed, that perfect glossy laugh that I now knew was a costume. "They want to open presents, but I told them Grandpa had to come down first." "You're special that way, Dad." The word Dad hung in the air between us like a question mark. Evan ran over and grabbed my hand. "Grandpa, come see what's under the tree. There's a huge one with your name on it." I let him pull me into the living room. The tree stood there, 10 feet tall, decorated with white lights and silver ornaments. It was beautiful. It was perfect. It was the kind of Christmas you see in movies, not in real life, especially not in the life of a 71-year-old man whose son had already decided to throw him out. As the kids tore into their presents, I sat on the couch and watched. Really watched. The way Lance smiled at Tessa when she whispered something in his ear. The way she touched his arm. The intimacy of people who share a secret. The secret of my house. The secret of my future. A few hours later, after the wrapping paper had been collected and the kids were distracted with their new toys, I excused myself to the bathroom. But instead, I walked to Lance's office. I needed to see if there was anything in there, anything that might explain how he'd done this. The desk was clean. Almost suspiciously clean. But in the top drawer, tucked beneath some tax documents, I found an envelope. My name was written on it in Lance's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a copy of the property transfer. The notary's signature. The date. Everything I'd supposedly signed months ago. And that's when I saw it. The notary's signature looked wrong. Too perfect. Too consistent. Like it had been copied more than once. I heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly tucked the envelope back. But my mind was racing now. Spinning. Piecing together something that had seemed simple before, a betrayal, into something far more complicated. What if I hadn't actually signed this? What if someone had done my signature for me? Tell me below, would you have read those papers carefully? I want to see what you'd do. Don't miss Chapter 3. Christmas morning's warmth faded by that afternoon. The house felt different after I saw that notary signature. Colder. Like I was watching a play where I knew the ending but not yet how we'd get there. I spent the rest of Christmas Day playing the part. Cooking ham with Tessa in the kitchen while she made small talk about property taxes and retirement communities. Playing with the boys in the living room, building block towers that Evan would knock down and laugh about. Sitting at the dinner table while Lance talked about his new business deals, his voice smooth as oil. But I was really watching. Studying. The way he avoided my eyes when Tessa mentioned the house. The way she controlled the conversation with small touches and looks. The way they'd glance at each other when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Around 8 o'clock that evening, after the kids had gone to bed and we were all sitting by the fireplace, Lance turned to me casually. "Dad, we've been thinking. You don't need all that space anymore. That house in Cedar Falls, it's a lot for one person, you know? Too many memories." He paused, waiting for my reaction. "We could help you move into something smaller. Cozy. Maybe closer to us." There it was. The first move. The beginning of the eviction dressed up as concern. "I like my house," I said quietly. "Marjorie and I built it." She picked out the colors for every room. "We know," Tessa said gently, leaning forward. "That's exactly why it might be hard to be there alone. All those memories. Wouldn't it be easier to start fresh?" Start fresh. That's what they call it when they want to push you out and pretend it's for your own good. "I'll think about it," I said, "because that's what you do when you're trying not to show your hand. You smile. You defer. You pretend to consider their kindness while your mind is working 3 steps ahead." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the guest bed, listening to the house settle around me. The creaks of floorboards. The hum of the furnace. At one point, I heard Lance and Tessa in their room, talking in low voices, but I couldn't make out the words. I didn't need to. I already knew what they were saying. By morning, I'd made a decision. I needed to see those original papers with my own eyes. The ones Lance had brought to my house months ago. The ones I supposedly signed. I left early, told them I wasn't feeling well. Drove home to Cedar Falls in silence, my hands tight on the wheel. The house was exactly as I'd left it. Quiet. Empty. Marjorie's presence still lingered in the way the afternoon light came through the living room window, the same way it had for 30 years. I went to my desk, the old oak one where I kept important documents, and started searching. I pulled out files, envelopes, folders. Years of paperwork, carefully organized. But I couldn't find the original envelope from Lance. The one with the property transfer. The one that changed everything. I searched for 2 hours. Every drawer. Every shelf. The filing cabinet in the basement. Nothing. It was gone. Which meant Lance had taken it. Which meant Lance knew exactly what he was doing when he brought it here. That's when I remembered the safe. The old one that Marjorie and I had installed 20 years ago, tucked behind the painting in the office closet. The one I hadn't opened in years. My hands were shaking as I punched in the combination. The date we were married. June 15th, 1976. The door clicked open. And there it was. A folder marked with Marjorie's initials. Inside were documents I'd completely forgotten about. Deeds. Trusts. Mineral rights. Property transfers dated back 15 years. An entire financial life that Lance didn't know I had. The adjoining lot. The one Marjorie and I bought back in the day but never mentioned. The one we'd put into a separate LLC under her name. I'd forgotten about it. But Marjorie hadn't. Marjorie always remembered. If you're shocked, tap like and share this. Don't miss Chapter 4. There's something Harold just discovered that changes everything. I sat on the floor of that office closet for what felt like hours, holding Marjorie's folder like it was made of gold. Because, in a way, it was. It was everything. It was a lifeline. The documents were dated carefully, each one methodical, signed by Marjorie with her precise handwriting. She'd done this deliberately, quietly, over years, building something in the shadows that our son didn't know existed. There was the LLC, Dunmore Heritage Trust. There was the adjoining lot deed. There were the mineral rights. And tucked in the back, like a present left for me specifically, was a handwritten note from Marjorie in her careful script. "Harold, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. But this isn't. This is for you. For when you need it. For when you finally understand why I always said trust is a luxury we can't afford with everyone. Keep this close. Use it wisely. Love, M. I read it 3 times. She'd known. Somehow, my wife had known that something like this might happen. Not this specifically, but something. She'd built a wall between us and whatever might come. And I'd forgotten about it completely. The construction company shares were there too. Not all of them, Lance had the majority. But I had enough to matter. Enough to be heard. I picked up the phone and called my attorney, Mr. Rollins. It was late, past 9 at night, but I didn't care. Harold, he said when he answered. Everything okay? I need to see you. Tomorrow. Early. I need to know if something is forged. There was a pause. Then, are you in danger? No, I said. But I'm about to do something that might change everything. And I need to know the truth first. I met Mr. Rollins at his office at 7 the next morning. He was a good man, sharp as a tack, and he'd handled all my business matters for 30 years. I laid out the documents in front of him and explained everything. The property transfer. The notary signature that looked too clean. The safe full of assets I'd forgotten about. He examined the papers through his reading glasses, his jaw getting tighter with each page. That notary signature, he said finally, tapping his pen on the document. It's a copy, not an original. You see the slight pixelation here? And here. That's a dead giveaway. What does that mean? It means someone scanned an existing notary signature and copied it onto a blank document. It's crude, frankly. Any court would reject it immediately. He looked up at me. Harold, this transfer isn't legal. Not completely. Your son forged this, or had someone forge it for him. My stomach twisted. Not just betrayal. Crime. The house, I said slowly. Can they actually kick me out? Not legally. Not with this paperwork. Rollins leaned back in his chair. But here's the thing, if you fight this openly, in court, it's messy. Public. And it's going to take time. Lawyers. Money. Your son will move heaven and earth to hide assets. He might do something desperate. I thought about Lance. About how far he'd already gone. What if I didn't fight it openly? I asked. Rollins studied me for a moment. What do you mean? I mean, what if I used what Marjorie left me to make my own move? Something he wouldn't see coming. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Harold, I need to know what you're thinking before I advise you on it. I told him everything. About the LLC. About the mineral rights. About the construction company shares. About the fact that while Lance thought he'd taken my house, there was an entire other foundation underneath it that he didn't know existed. I want to sell, I said. Through the trust. Quick. Before he realizes what's happening. Rollins listened without interrupting. When I finished, he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. That would be legal, he said carefully. The trust is ironclad. Your name isn't even on it officially. It's all Marjorie's. He'd have no claim. He paused. But Harold, once you do this, there's no going back. Your relationship with your son is already gone, I finished. He just doesn't know it yet. That afternoon, I started making calls. Cash buyers. Quick closings. The kind of deal where nobody asks too many questions. Real estate moves faster when money is the only language. By the end of the week, I had 3 serious offers. All of them significantly above market value. All of them ready to close in days, not months. The machinery was already in motion. But here's what I didn't know yet. Lance was making moves of his own. Tell me below, if you were Harold, Would you go through with it? Chapter 5 is where everything gets dangerous. New Year's Eve. While Lance and Tessa were packing their bags for Aspen, I was packing something else. I was packing up years of anger, disappointment, and betrayal into something quiet and precise and absolutely unstoppable. Mr. Rollins had called that morning. "We have a buyer. Cash. $3 million. They want to close today. Today. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Today. Tell them yes," I said. I spent the morning at the bank, signing paperwork I actually read this time. Every single word. Every clause. Every line. When I was done, I was no longer the legal owner of the house. The trust was. And the trust now belonged to someone else. But nobody knew that yet. I drove to my old office around 3 in the afternoon. The place I'd built from nothing, where Lance had learned everything he knew. The door was locked, something that had never happened before. Not in 30 years. I looked through the window. Inside, cardboard boxes were stacked against the walls. Files were being packed. Someone was dismantling my life's work. I called Lance. "Where are you?" "At the office." "Why?" "I need you to come meet me at the house. Cedar Falls. 1 hour." "Dad, we're about to leave for 1 hour, Lance. It's important." He arrived 45 minutes later, annoyed, in a rush. Tessa wasn't with him. Just my son, his face tight, his hands in his pockets. "What's going on?" he asked. "I want to show you something," I said. I walked him around the property. The same property he thought he owned. The same property I'd already sold. "It's beautiful today," I said. "Don't you think? The way the light hits the front. Marjorie loved it at this time of year." "Dad, what is this about?" "We have a flight." "Look at the yard," I interrupted. "The roses. I planted those for her. Do you remember?" He didn't. He was checking his phone, calculating how long this was taking. That's when I heard the truck pull up. The locksmith. Right on time. "What's happening?" Lance's voice changed. Sharpened. "Something you didn't plan on," I said quietly. The locksmith got out of the truck and walked to the front door. He had new locks. He had my keys. He had everything he needed. "Wait," Lance said, and for the first time, there was uncertainty in his voice. "Wait. What are you doing?" "I'm taking back what's mine," I said. As Lance watched, the locksmith removed the old deadbolt. The one Lance and Tessa had walked through countless times, convinced they owned the place. Convinced they'd gotten away with it. By 6 o'clock that evening, every lock in the house had been changed. By 7, a white post had been hammered into the front yard. By 8, the red sold sign had been hung in place. Lance stood frozen, watching it happen. His face went through every emotion in sequence: shock, anger, confusion, and finally, when he understood that he'd lost control of the narrative, fear. "You can't do this," he said. "You can't. The paperwork is invalid," I finished. "The notary's signature was forged, Lance. Which means you never owned this house. Which means you can't sell it. Which means everything you built on this property is built on sand." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "But the business," he said quietly. "The company shares are being transferred as we speak," I said. "Through channels you don't have access to. Through a trust you didn't know existed." The sun was setting now, painting the sky orange and red. The sold sign swayed slightly in the cold December wind. "By tomorrow morning, when you land in Aspen, you'll find that the house is no longer yours. The business is no longer fully yours. And everything you thought you'd won is going to feel like it slipped right through your fingers." I paused. Just like you planned to slip me out of your life. I left him standing in the driveway as darkness fell. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote him one letter. Just one. Not angry. Not bitter. Just clear. You took my home when I trusted you. I took back my peace when you didn't deserve it. Don't worry, you'll be fine. You've always known how to start over, Dad. I put it in an envelope and placed it in the mailbox. The next morning, while Lance and Tessa were somewhere over the Rocky Mountains, I sat in my old house, my real house, and waited. Because there was one more thing I hadn't told anyone about. One more layer to this story that was about to change everything. If you thought that was the end, you were wrong. There's more. If you love Justice Tales, hit like and drop a comment. What would you do next? Chapter 6 is where the real fight begins. The phone started ringing before 8 in the morning. I let it ring. First Lance calling from the airport with his voice tight and controlled. Then Tessa, her tone sharp as broken glass. By the time Mr. Rollins called, I'd already stopped counting. Harold, we have a situation, he said carefully. Lance just filed an emergency motion. He's claiming the notary situation doesn't matter because you're mentally unfit. He's going to argue diminished capacity, that you couldn't possibly have acted rationally. The irony cut deep. He was right, in a way. A rational man would have fought this in court and called it a day. But I was something else now. I was a man who'd been woken up. What do we do? I asked. We document everything. Medical records. Psychological evaluations. We prove you're sharp. You know what you're doing. He paused. Harold, they're also moving money. Fast. I'm seeing transfers out of the construction company accounts. They know they're losing control and they're trying to grab what they can before the paperwork catches up. That afternoon, I drove to my office. Not the construction company. That was already being seized through legal channels. I drove to a small storage unit I'd rented decades ago and forgotten about. Another thing Marjorie had pushed me to do. Inside were filing cabinets. Stacks of them. Records going back 40 years. Every contract. Every job site. Every financial transaction. Everything I'd ever built. Documented. I spent 6 hours photographing pages. Uploading them to a secure server Mr. Rollins had set up. By the time I was done, the entire foundation of the construction company was backed up in multiple locations. Every dollar Lance had tried to hide, documented and dated. The knock on my door came around midnight. It was a woman I'd never seen before. Blonde. Expensive suit. Hard eyes. Mr. Dunmore? My name is Victoria Chen. I'm a private investigator hired by your son. She held out a business card. I'd like to ask you some questions about your recent actions. I don't think so, I said, and I closed the door. But she'd rattled something in me. Not fear, something else. The knowledge that Lance was pulling in favors now. That he was calling in people with resources and no scruples. The next morning, I woke to find graffiti on my mailbox. Not anything crude or obvious. Just one word, spray-painted in black. Thief. I stood there looking at it for a long time. Thinking about how far this had gone. Thinking about my grandsons. About the fact that they were probably hearing things now. Hearing their parents say things about me that would never quite wash clean. That's when I got the call from Evan's school. Mr. Dunmore, we had an incident on the playground. Your grandson was telling the other children that his grandfather stole his family's house. There was some pushing. Nothing serious, but we need to talk about what he's been hearing at home. My chest went tight. This wasn't about justice anymore. This was about a 9-year-old boy standing on a playground, confused and angry, because his parents had turned him into a weapon. I called my attorney immediately. "We need to document all of this," I told him. "Every threat, every intimidation attempt, every time they use the kids as cover for what they're doing." "Harold," Mr. Rollins said carefully, "there's something else you need to know. Lance hired someone, a real estate vulture. This person specializes in contested properties. They're going to file a suit claiming that Marjorie's trust was invalid from the start. They're going to argue that community property laws mean half of everything belongs to the family regardless of how it was titled." "Can they win?" "No," he said. "But they can drag this out. Years, potentially. They can make it expensive. They can make it public. And they can do all of it for one reason: to punish you." I sat with that for a while. The real cost of what I'd done. Not to them, but to myself. To my grandsons. To everything I'd thought I was protecting. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since Marjorie died. I drove to the cemetery. Her headstone was simple. Just her name, her dates, and one line underneath. She saw what was coming and prepared. I sat on the bench beside her for an hour without speaking. Just sat there in the cold, feeling the weight of every decision I'd made in the past month. When I got home, there was an email from an unknown sender. The subject line said, "You should see what your son is planning." Inside was a screenshot of an online forum. A classified ad. Really. Someone was offering $50,000 to anyone who could dig up dirt on me. Criminal history. Financial misconduct. Anything that would make me look like the villain in this story. They were buying a narrative. The kind of narrative that, once it gets out there, sticks to you like tar. I forwarded the email to Mr. Rollins with one message: "We need to talk about offense instead of defense." By the next morning, I'd already decided. If Lance wanted a fight, I was going to give him one. But not the kind he expected. Because I just realized something crucial. I still had one card left to play. One thing that nobody knew about. One final move that would change everything. If you thought the story was escalating, you haven't seen anything yet. Chapter 7 is where someone's entire world crumbles. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. Tell me in the comments, do you think Harold should keep fighting or walk away? Monday morning arrived cold and clear. I sat in Mr. Rollins' office with my coffee growing cold on his desk. He'd called an emergency meeting, and I could see the concern etched into every line of his face. "I've been contacted by the district attorney's office," he said quietly. "They're investigating the notary's signature. It appears your son didn't forge it himself, but he did hire someone. There's a paper trail, payments to a document services company. They're building a case." "For what?" I asked. "Forgery. Fraud. Wire fraud if any money crossed state lines. We're talking felony charges, Harold." The word felony hung in the air between us like a guillotine blade. What does that mean for me? It means the tables have turned. Your son isn't attacking anymore, he's defending. The DA's office wants your cooperation as a witness. They're willing to negotiate his sentence if he pleads guilty to conspiracy. I'd spent my entire life believing that family was sacred, that blood meant loyalty, that you protected your own, even when they didn't deserve it. But I also believed in honesty, in consequences, in the idea that actions have weight. Lance had made his choice the night he sat in his kitchen and plotted to throw me out after Christmas. This was just the machinery catching up to it. "I'll cooperate," I said. By Wednesday, the news had hit the local papers. Not front page, but substantial. Local construction magnate's son charged with forgery. The story laid out everything. The fake notary. The trust that had been hidden away. The house that had changed hands 3 times in a month. By Thursday, social media had picked it up. My name was everywhere, split down the middle. Half people who thought I was a genius, half people who thought I was a monster for turning my own son over to the authorities. What I didn't expect was the phone call that came Friday afternoon. "Mr. Dunmore, this is Janet from Cedar Falls Community Hospital. We have your grandson Miles in the emergency room. He's okay, but he had an anxiety attack at school. His mother is requesting that you not be contacted, but I thought you should know." I drove to the hospital in silence. When I got there, I found Tessa in the waiting room, her face a mask of fury. "You did this," she said as soon as she saw me. "You destroyed this family, and now look what's happening." "I want to see him," I said. "You can't. I'm his mother, and I'm saying you're not." "Tessa." A nurse appeared, holding a clipboard. "The boy is asking for his grandfather. It's his choice." I found Miles in a hospital bed, looking small and scared. And 4 was in his arm. His eyes were red from crying. "Grandpa," he said, and his voice broke. I sat down beside him and took his hand. "Hey buddy. You okay? Mom and Dad are fighting all the time now. Dad keeps yelling about his lawyer, and Mom says it's your fault." He looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "Did you steal our house, Grandpa?" And that's when it hit me. The real cost of everything I'd done. "No, buddy," I said quietly. "But I did something that made your dad and mom very angry. And that's on me. That's my responsibility." "Are you going to jail?" "No. Your dad might. Because he did something wrong first. But that doesn't make what I did right." He cried then. Just let it all out. And I held his hand while he did, feeling like the worst grandfather in the world. By the time I left the hospital, I'd made another decision. Not to stop fighting, but to change the battlefield. I called Mr. Rollins. "I want to reach out to the DA. Tell them I want immunity for Lance in exchange for my full cooperation and a complete asset transfer to Evan and Miles. Through a trust they can't touch." "Harold, it's what Marjorie would want," I interrupted. "Justice isn't about punishment. It's about fixing what's broken." By the next week, the deal was done. Lance wouldn't face jail time. The house would go into a legal trust for the boys, with Tessa as trustee, but with strict oversight. The construction company shares would be split, with enough going to protect my grandson's future. And I would walk away with nothing but Marjorie's words and the knowledge that I'd finally understood what she meant. The sold sign came down from the front yard. New owners arrived to find a house waiting for them, empty, clean, and ready for a fresh start. I rented an apartment across town. Small, quiet, the kind of place where you can think clearly. The last thing I did before I moved out was leave a note on the kitchen counter. "Lance, I know this doesn't fix anything, but it's all I have to give. Take care of your boys. They're the only part of this that really mattered. Love, Dad." Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss Chapter 8, where everything reaches its breaking point. Tell me in the comments what you think Harold should do next. Your voice matters. 3 months later, I was living a life I hadn't anticipated. Quiet, small, but mine. The apartment overlooked the park where Marjorie and I used to walk on Sunday mornings. I spent most of my days there now, reading books I'd never had time for, watching the seasons turn, thinking about the man I used to be. The news cycle had moved on. Lance's case had been reduced to a footnote in the local legal system. Tessa had hired a publicist who'd spun the story into family reconciliation in the papers. From the outside, everything looked settled. But inside, nothing was settled at all. The first crack came when Evan showed up at my door on a Saturday morning. He was 13 now, old enough to drive with someone, old enough to have questions, young enough to still believe his grandfather might have answers. "Mom said I could come see you if I wanted to," he said, standing in my doorway like he wasn't quite sure he was welcome. "She said it was my choice." "Come in," I said, and I meant it with every part of my broken heart. We sat in my living room, and he told me everything. About his father's shame. About his mother's bitterness. About Miles waking up at night with bad dreams. About the way his friends at school had looked at him when the story broke. "Why did you do it, Grandpa?" he asked. "Why did you take the house away from us?" I could have given him the version where I was the hero defending himself. The version where his parents were the villains. The version that made sense on social media and in courtroom arguments. Instead, I told him the truth. "I was angry," I said, "and scared. Your father and your mother did something that hurt me very deeply. They betrayed my trust in a way I didn't think was possible. And instead of dealing with that hurt like a grown man, I turned it into a weapon. I told myself I was being smart, being strategic. But really, I was being vengeful. And vengeance is something that spreads, Evan. It touches everyone around it, including you." He sat with that for a while, not saying anything. "Do you regret it?" he finally asked. "Every single day," I said. "Not because I'm in this apartment. Not because I lost money or a house. I regret it because I hurt you. Because I made your childhood smaller. Because I taught you that the right response to betrayal is more betrayal." Evan looked out the window at the park. "Mom says Dad was going to throw you out. That he was a criminal. He was. He is. But I'm not the judge of that. The law is. And the law has decided what his punishment is. What I did after that, that was just me being angry disguised as justice." "So what do we do now?" Evan asked. "We do better," I said. "We both do better." He started visiting every Saturday after that. Sometimes he'd bring Miles. Sometimes he'd come alone. We'd sit in the apartment and talk about things that didn't require a courtroom to understand. His school. His dreams. The girl he liked but was too nervous to talk to. Slowly, without anyone planning it, we started healing. But healing isn't linear. It doesn't come in neat packages tied with bows. The call came on a Tuesday in April. It was Tessa, and her voice was different. Not angry, but urgent. "Harold, it's Lance. He's been in an accident. He's at Cedar Falls General." I didn't ask questions. I just drove. When I got there, I found my son in a hospital bed with bandages on his left side and his left leg in a cast. A car accident. He'd swerved to avoid another vehicle and hit a telephone pole. He was lucky to be alive, the doctors said. Another few inches and it would have been catastrophic. Tessa was sitting in the waiting room, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. When she saw me, her face crumpled. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry for all of it. For everything we did. For the way we treated you. I've had 3 months to think about it, and I can't justify it anymore." I sat down beside her. "How is he?" "Scared. In pain. He keeps asking for you." Lance was awake when I went in. His eyes were open, tracking me as I approached the bed. "Dad," he said, and his voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry." Those 2 words. The ones I'd waited months to hear. And now that they were here, I realized they didn't fix anything. They didn't undo the betrayal. They didn't erase the pain. But they were a start. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry too." We sat in silence for a while, and then Lance told me everything. How Tessa had pushed him to do it. How he'd convinced himself it was just business. How he'd convinced himself that I wouldn't mind once I understood the plan. How he'd convinced himself of so many things that weren't true. I was jealous, he admitted. Of your legacy. Of the way people in Cedar Falls still talked about you like you were something special. And then you gave me the company, and I thought that would fix it. But it didn't. You were still the one people remembered. You were still the one they respected. So you decided to destroy me? I asked. I decided to replace you, he said. And then when that didn't work, when you fought back, I decided I was going to prove that you were the villain. That you'd always been the villain. Was I? I asked. Am I? No, he said quietly. You're just a man who loved his family too much. And I took that love and turned it into a weapon. That's on me. The hospital stay was 3 weeks. I spent every day there, not because I was forgiving him, but because he was my son and he was hurt. The same way I'd be there if anyone I loved was suffering. But something had shifted in me. The need for vengeance had burned itself out. What was left was something more complicated, the recognition that we were both victims of the same thing. Our need to be right. Our need to win. Our need to prove something about ourselves through someone else's defeat. On the day Lance was released, I drove him home. Tessa and the boys were waiting. Miles ran to his father immediately. Evan hung back, watching me. You're staying? Miles asked hopefully, looking between his father and me. Nobody, I said. But I'm coming back. If that's okay. It was okay. It was better than okay. Over the next few months, we built something new. Not the old family, that was gone. But something different. Something more honest. Lance apologized to his boys. Tessa apologized to everyone. I apologized for the way I'd responded, for the pain I'd caused in my pursuit of what I thought was justice. The house in Cedar Falls sat empty for a while, then was sold to a young family with 2 kids. I drove past one day and saw children playing in the yard where I'd planted those roses for Marjorie. It was right somehow. The house wasn't mine to hold onto anymore. It was never really mine to begin with. It was just a place, and places are meant to be lived in. I kept the apartment. But I spent more and more time with my family. Not the family that Lance had tried to take from me. The family that remained after all the anger had burned away. On Father's Day, Evan and Miles gave me a card. It was homemade, glittery and crooked, with a drawing of me sitting on a bench in the park. Inside it said, "To the best grandpa, who taught us that saying sorry is sometimes braver than staying angry. Love, Evan and Miles." I sat holding that card for a long time, thinking about all the ways I could have handled this differently. All the versions of this story that could have ended with less pain. But then I realized, this was the version that needed to happen. The version where everyone got hurt. The version where we all had to look at ourselves and admit what we'd done. The version where healing was the only option left. Sometimes, you don't get to choose the easy ending. Sometimes you have to live through the hard one and trust that on the other side of it, if you're willing to do the work, there's something worth having. Subscribe and turn on notifications for the final chapter. Tell me in the comments, do you believe people can really change? Can families really come back from betrayal? Chapter 9 is the reckoning. Don't miss it. A year had passed since the accident. The seasons had cycled through again. Leaves fell and came back. Snow came and melted. The world kept turning, indifferent to human suffering and human redemption. Lance was walking again, though he moved with a slight limp that probably never would go away. Tessa had started therapy and was teaching part-time at a local college. The boys were doing well, better than they had any right to be after everything. And I was still in my apartment, still visiting the park where Marjorie and I used to walk, still trying to understand what it all meant. The evening of Father's Day, I got a text from Lance. "Can we talk? Not about the past. About the future." We met at a coffee shop downtown. He looked different now, less polished, more real. The kind of different that comes from facing yourself in the mirror and not liking what you see, then slowly becoming someone you could live with. "I've been thinking about something," he said, stirring his coffee slowly. "About the company. About legacy. About what I want to leave behind." "Okay," I said, waiting for him to continue. "I want to rebuild it," he said. "Not for me. For the boys. I want to teach them what you taught me, how to build something honest. Something that lasts. I want to show them that you can fail and be dishonest and still come back and do better." "That's good," I said. "I want you to help me," he continued. "Not because I deserve it, but because they deserve it. They deserve to know their grandfather not as the man who kicked their father out, but as the man who came back anyway, who didn't write us off, who believed we could do better." I sat with that for a while, feeling the weight of what he was asking. "What about Tessa?" I asked. "She's supportive," he said. "She knows she was part of this too. She's working through her own stuff. But she agrees that the boys need you in their lives. And maybe the family needs you too." That night, I walked through the park one last time as a man living alone in an apartment. The next morning, I started packing. Not everything, I didn't need much. But enough to move into the guest room of their house. Not as a burden. Not as someone they owed. But as someone who was choosing to be part of their lives despite everything that had happened. The first day back in that house was strange. The rooms felt smaller than I remembered. The kitchen was different, they'd remodeled it. The living room had new furniture. It was their space now, not mine. But in the office, Lance had set up something. A desk facing the window, with a nameplate on it, Harold Dunmore, founder. He wanted me to help him go through all the old records, to help him understand how the company had been built, to help him rebuild it the right way. "We're going to start small," he explained. "Just local jobs. Just the kind of work that lets us sleep at night. And we're going to teach the boys as we go." I looked at my name on that desk and felt something I hadn't felt in over a year. Not vindication. Not victory. Not revenge. Peace. That first week, we went on a job site together. Evan and Miles came along to learn. We were building a house for a young couple with a baby on the way. It was the kind of house I used to build all the time. Modest, sturdy, honest. Standing there with my son and my grandsons, watching them learn to measure and frame and understand the weight of what it means to build something, I understood what Marjorie had been trying to tell me all those years. "Never sign what you don't read twice," she'd written. But there was something she hadn't written. Something I had to learn on my own. Never destroy something with your own hands that you might need to rebuild later. Over the following months, something remarkable happened. The company started getting contracts. Not because of me, because Lance was doing good work, because his reputation was rebuilding, because the community was willing to give him a second chance. And I was there, watching from the sidelines, helping where I could, staying quiet when it was time to stay quiet. The note I'd left in the mailbox so long ago, Lance still had it. He'd framed it and hung it in his office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder of what he'd lost and what he'd gotten back. On a cold November evening, exactly 2 years after that Christmas when everything fell apart, Lance asked me to sit down. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the deed to the property. The one I tried to take from you." "Okay," I said cautiously. "I want to put it in trust for the boys. But I want you to manage it. I want them to see that you're their anchor. That you're the one they can trust with what matters." "Lance," I started. "Not because you earned it by winning," he interrupted. "But because you earned it by staying. Because you came back. Because you chose family over being right." I didn't say yes immediately. I sat with it for a week. I prayed on it. I walked the park and talked to Marjorie in the way I'd been talking to her since she died. And then I said yes. But I did something else too. I called my attorney and drew up my own papers. Everything I had, the stocks, the assets, the mineral rights, all of it went into a trust for Evan and Miles. Not held over them as leverage. Not given to them with conditions. Just given. Free and clear. With the understanding that someday, when they were old enough, I would tell them the whole story. Not the version about being right, but the version about learning to be better. The sold sign stayed down. The house remained a place where a family lived. And I remained in that house, not as a visitor, but as part of the foundation. If you've made it this far, you know that this isn't a story about winning. It's a story about choosing connection over victory. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to choose family over being right? Chapter 10 is the final truth. Don't miss it. I'm 73 years old now. I still live in the guest room of Lance and Tessa's house, though we've stopped calling it that. It's just my room. My space. My home in a way my own house never quite became after Marjorie died. The construction company is thriving. Not in the way Lance wanted it to, not in massive deals and corporate expansion, but in the way that matters. We've built 43 homes in the past 2 years. Good homes. Honest homes. Houses where families will raise children and create memories and maybe, if they're lucky, never know the kind of betrayal that almost destroyed mine. Evan is 17 now. He works with us on the weekends, learning the trade the same way Lance learned it from me. He wants to go to college first, wants to see the world. I tell him that's smart. That you need to know who you are before you can know what you want to build. Miles is 14. He's more artistic than his brother, more inclined toward design than construction. But he comes to the job sites too, sketching out ideas, imagining what could be before we build it. Last month, he showed me a design for a community center. It was beautiful. I told him I'd fund it if he could get the approvals. He's working on it. Tessa and I have become something I didn't expect. Not friends exactly, but respectful. She apologized to me last year. Really apologized. Not the kind of apology you give because you feel obligated, but the kind you give because you've spent enough time thinking about what you did to understand why it was wrong. I accepted her apology. I also told her that I understood how she'd convinced Lance. How easy it probably was to paint me as someone out of touch, someone who didn't deserve what he had. How easy it is to rationalize greed when you frame it as justice. She cried when I said that. Not because I was angry, but because I wasn't. Because I understood her in a way she didn't expect to be understood. As for Lance, my son and I have a relationship now that's built on something closer to equality than we ever had before. He's not my little boy learning to be a man. He's a man who made mistakes, massive mistakes, and then chose to become someone better. I respect that. I tell him I respect it. And I think it means something to him that it comes from me. But there's one thing I never told anyone. One final layer to this story that I've kept close because I needed time to understand it myself. About 3 months after the accident, when Lance was still in physical therapy and I was still figuring out if I could live under the same roof with him, I got a letter. It was from the district attorney's office. Not about Lance. About the notary signature. They'd found the man who'd forged it. His name was Richard Summers. He was a semi-professional document specialist who'd done work for various people over the years. He'd taken a deal to testify against my son in exchange for reduced charges. But in his testimony, he said something that stopped everything. Lance hadn't asked him to forge my signature. Lance had asked him to do something else. Something worse. He'd asked him to create evidence that I'd signed the papers. But he'd also asked him to create evidence that would prove I was mentally unfit. That I'd been showing signs of dementia. That I'd been vulnerable. That I'd been easy to manipulate. The plan wasn't just to take my house. It was to take my credibility, my reputation, my authority. They wanted to establish a narrative where I was the crazy old man who'd been conned, and Lance was just trying to help. When I found out, I had one of the most important conversations of my life with Lance. I went to his room and I sat on the edge of his bed and I asked him straight, "Did you plan to have me committed?" He didn't answer for a long time, just stared at the ceiling. "We talked about it," he finally said. "Tessa wanted to. She said if we could prove diminished capacity, we could get power of attorney. We could take control of all your assets, not just the house." I left the room. I didn't say anything. I just left. That night, I sat in my room and thought about whether I could forgive that. Whether I could live with someone who'd planned not just to steal from me, but to destroy me. To erase me. To make me disappear into a nursing home somewhere while they picked my bones clean. By morning, I knew the answer. And it wasn't the answer I wanted. I called my attorney and started the process of moving out. Lance caught me packing. "Dad, wait. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never went through with it." I stopped her. I know," I said. "But you thought about it. You planned it. That means something, Lance. That means I have to be careful about how much I trust you." I moved back into an apartment. A smaller one this time, above a bookstore. I would see the boys on weekends. But I wasn't going to live under the same roof anymore. That line had been crossed. What saved us wasn't forgiveness. It was honesty. Lance started therapy. Real therapy. Not the kind where you talk about your feelings for an hour and then go back to being the same. The kind where you dig down to the roots of who you are and ask yourself hard questions about why you're capable of the things you've done. He came to see me 6 months into his therapy. He was different. Not fixed. Nobody is ever fixed. But willing to do the work. "I wanted to explain," he said. "Not to get you to forgive me, but because you deserve to understand." He told me about his childhood fears. About watching me build everything and feeling like he would never be enough. About the moment he realized I would never see him the way he wanted to be seen. About how that turned into resentment. About how resentment turned into a plan to prove that I was wrong about him. That I was wrong, period. "I needed you to be less than me," he said. "Because if you were more than me, then I would never catch up. I would never matter." "You always mattered," I told him. "You just never believed me." "I believe you now," he said. "I don't know if that helps. But I believe you." It didn't fix everything. But it created space for something new. Over the next few years, we rebuilt something. Not the family I'd had before. That was gone. But something stronger. Something that could survive honesty. Something that could hold both the betrayal and the redemption at the same time. I moved back into the house when Evan was 16. Not because everything was perfect, but because we'd all decided that we were going to try to be better every single day. The greatest justice isn't in the shouting or the revenge. It's in the quiet knowledge that you did everything you could to build something worth having. And when it breaks, it's in doing the work to build it again. I still walk through the park sometimes. I still talk to Marjorie in the way that comes naturally when you're standing in a place where someone you loved used to stand. And I still think about that Christmas when everything fell apart. But I don't regret it anymore. Not in the way I used to. Because on the other side of that pain is my grandson learning to build with his own 2 hands. It's my son understanding that power isn't something you take, it's something you earn through respect. It's Tessa learning that you can hurt people and still come back and be part of their lives if you're willing to do the work. The sold sign is long gone now. The property was never sold to anyone else. The transaction was reversed when the legal issues resolved. It stands as it always did. A house where a family lives. A house where mistakes were made and lessons were learned. My name is Harold Dunmore. I'm 73 years old. And this is the story of how I learned that the greatest power isn't in winning. It's in choosing love when hate would be easier. It's in choosing family when walking away would hurt less. Marjorie left me a note that said, "Never sign what you don't read twice." But she should have left me one more. Never destroy what you might need to rebuild later. Because the greatest justice isn't a sold sign. It's a man who nearly lost everything learning to hold what matters with an open hand instead of a closed fist. If you loved this story, if you felt something in your chest when you watched families break and rebuild, I need you to do 3 things. First, subscribe to this channel. Turn on those notifications. Because there are more stories coming. Stories about love and betrayal and second chances. Stories that matter. Second, I need you to comment. Tell me your truth. Have you ever been betrayed by family? Have you ever had to choose between being right and being connected? Have you ever done something you couldn't take back and had to figure out how to live with it anyway? Your comments matter. Your stories matter. Share them with me and with this community. And third, share this story. Send it to someone who needs to hear that redemption is possible. That families can come back from the brink. That betrayal doesn't have to be the end. That sometimes the greatest love is in saying I'm sorry and meaning it. And sometimes the greatest strength is in accepting that apology and trying again. This is Harold Dunmore, and I'm grateful you walked this journey with me. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. And thank you for remembering that we're all doing the best we can with what we know at the time. The story doesn't end here. It just keeps going. One day at a time. One choice at a time. One chance to be better than we were yesterday. That's where real redemption lives.